Most people will spend 40 years fighting a war they were never trained to win. They call it the grind. Wake early, commute far, work hard, save what's left, and hope that discipline alone will one day purchase freedom. But discipline was never the missing ingredient. Position was. And nobody teaches position, because the system runs smoother when you don't understand it. 25 centuries ago, a general named Sun Tzu wrote that the wise fighter wins first, then goes to war, while the ordinary fighter goes to war first, and hopes to win somewhere along the way. He was describing armies. He could have been describing bank accounts. Look closely at the wealthy, and you'll notice something uncomfortable: they rarely work harder than everyone else. Some work far less. What separates them isn't effort, it's the ground they choose to stand on before the first move is even made. The middle class fight uphill, exposed, reacting to a market that was never designed with their advantage in mind. The wealthy fight from terrain they selected in advance, on timing they control, using resources most people never learn to see. This is not a story about hustle. Hustle is what people do when they've already lost the high ground. This is a story about something far older, far quieter, and far more dangerous to the systems that profit from your confusion. Sun Tzu never mentioned money once in The Art of War. And yet almost every principle he taught about conquering kingdoms translates, almost line for line, into conquering scarcity: the general who studies terrain before marching, the strategist who wins without fighting, the commander who never lets emotion choose his next move. By the end of this video, you won't just understand why some people build wealth in a fraction of the time others do. You'll understand the exact strategic sequence Sun Tzu would use if he were alive today, broke, and starting from nothing. But before any of that, before leverage, before timing, before positioning, there is one battlefield most people lose on before they've even noticed the war has started. And it isn't the economy. It isn't luck. It's something far closer to home. Sun Tzu wrote that if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. But if you know neither, you will lose every single time. Most people trying to build wealth have already lost this battle before they've opened a single investment account, because they've never studied the enemy hiding inside their own habits. Here's what nobody tells you: your bank account is not a reflection of your income. It's a reflection of decisions made by a version of you shaped years before you earned your first paycheck. The words your family used about money. The fear disguised as practicality. The belief that wanting more makes you greedy, or that stability is safer than growth. These aren't opinions. They're inherited terrain, and most people build their entire financial strategy on ground they never chose. Consider two employees, same salary, same city. One sees a bonus and immediately imagines what could go wrong, so it sits in a checking account, untouched, just in case. The other sees the same bonus and asks a different question: what does this money need to become? Same income. Completely different battlefield conditions. 10 years later, one has a portfolio. The other has an explanation for why things just got expensive. This is the war Sun Tzu would fight first, not against a slow economy, not against inflation, not even against the boss who underpays. Against the quiet, inherited assumptions running the entire operation from inside the tent. Ask yourself honestly, when money enters your hands, what does the voice say first? Fear, or possibility? That single sentence, repeated for a decade, is closer to a prophecy than a preference. But knowing yourself is only half the equation. Sun Tzu warned that even a general who understands his own army perfectly can still be destroyed, if he fails to understand the timing of the war itself. And this is where most ambitious people make their second, far costlier mistake. Sun Tzu's most famous idea is often quoted and rarely understood: the victorious warrior wins first, then goes to war, while the defeated warrior goes to war first, then seeks victory. People assume this means, prepare a little before you act. It means something far more strategic: by the time the battle is visible to everyone else, the outcome has already been decided by moves made long before. Look at how wealth actually gets built, and you'll notice the pattern hiding in plain sight. Warren Buffett didn't become a legendary investor the day he made his biggest trade. He spent over a decade reading annual reports before most people even knew his name, quietly studying companies the way a general studies terrain, long before the market ever rewarded him publicly. The sudden success the world saw was simply the visible tip of an invisible war that had already been won. Compare that to the average person's relationship with opportunity. A promotion opens up, and only then do they scramble to learn the skill it requires. A market shifts, and only then do they start researching. They are declaring war after the terrain has already been claimed by someone else, and wondering why the fight feels so exhausting. Here's the uncomfortable truth: the lucky break you're waiting for already requires a version of you that doesn't exist yet. Not luck. Preparation, applied quietly, before anyone is watching or rewarding it. This is why the wealthy often look calm during chaos, recessions, layoffs, market crashes. They aren't reacting. They positioned years earlier, while everyone else was busy being realistic. But preparation alone isn't enough. Sun Tzu also taught that revealing your strength too early can cost you the very war you spent years preparing for. Which raises a dangerous question: what happens when the world can see exactly what you want? Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is based on deception: appear weak when you are strong, and strong when you are weak. To modern ears this sounds manipulative. To a strategist, it's simply the recognition that revealing your full position before the right moment hands your opponent a map of exactly how to beat you. Now apply this to a salary negotiation. Most people walk in and, without meaning to, broadcast desperation, mentioning bills, timelines, how badly they need this raise. They've shown their full hand before a single card was played. The employer, consciously or not, adjusts the offer accordingly. Compare that to someone who walks in calm, prepared, and slightly detached from the outcome, not because they don't need the money, but because they understand that visible need is the single most expensive thing you can reveal in any negotiation. The same principle governs investing. Retail investors often announce their excitement the moment a stock starts climbing, buying loudly at the top, driven by visible emotion. Meanwhile, patient capital, pension funds, long-term investors, people who've studied Sun Tzu's patience without ever reading the book, accumulate quietly during the very moments when everyone else is fearful and unwatching. They win by moving when no one is looking, not when everyone is cheering. There's a version of this in everyday life too. The coworker who mentions, almost casually, that another company reached out to them, without ever saying they're looking to leave, often ends up with a counteroffer nobody else in the office gets. Not because they're more talented. Because they reveal just enough to shift perception, and nothing more. This isn't about dishonesty. It's about timing disclosure the way a general times in advance, only when it strengthens your position, never simply because emotion demands release. Ask yourself, in your last financial decision, did you reveal your hand too early, out of excitement, anxiety, or the need to be understood? Most people do, without ever noticing the cost. But even perfect concealment means nothing if you're fighting on the wrong ground entirely. Which leads to a much bigger problem, one that traps far more people than bad negotiating ever will. Sun Tzu taught that the skillful strategist attacks where the enemy is unprepared and appears where he is not expected. Armies that charge directly into fortified positions bleed for inches of ground. Armies that find the undefended flank take entire territories with barely a fight. Wealth works the same way, and almost nobody applies this lesson correctly. Watch what happens every time a hot opportunity appears. A side hustle goes viral. Everyone rushes toward it at once, flooding the same market, competing for the same customers, fighting over the same shrinking margins. This is a fortified position. Thousands of soldiers charging the same wall. Even the ones who win often win exhausted, having spent more energy than the reward justified. Meanwhile, the wealthy are rarely found in the crowded room. Andrew Carnegie didn't fight his way into an already saturated industry, he positioned himself inside steel just as America's railroads created unprecedented, underserved demand for it. He walked onto empty ground before anyone else recognized it as a battlefield at all. The opportunity wasn't loud. It wasn't trending. It was simply unclaimed. You can see a quieter version of this everywhere. The freelance designer who ignores the oversaturated market of logo design and instead specializes in a narrow, unglamorous niche, say, packaging for small supplement brands, often earns more, with less competition, than 100 generalists fighting for the same visible clients. Not because the niche is exciting. Because it's empty. Most people chase opportunity by asking, what is everyone talking about? Sun Tzu would ask a sharper question, where is no one looking? The crowded room feels safe because you're surrounded by others. But safety in numbers is exactly what keeps the reward small enough to split 1,000 ways. This is where most ambitious people quietly sabotage themselves for years, not through laziness, but through fighting fiercely on ground that was already claimed. And it explains why some battles, even won, still end up costing far more than they were ever worth. Sun Tzu warned that no country has ever benefited from a prolonged war. Even a victorious army, kept in the field too long, sees its strength worn down and its treasury emptied. Victory delayed stops being victory at all, it becomes a slow bleeding that feels, at every individual moment, like something worth enduring just a little longer. This is the exact trap hiding inside the job someone hates but stays in for, just one more year. The degree pursued long after passion for the field has died, because too much money has already been spent to walk away. The investment held for a decade past the point it stopped making sense, defended not with logic but with the quiet, painful math of sunk cost. I've already put so much in, I can't stop now. Sun Tzu would call this exactly what it is, a war that should have ended long ago, kept alive only by pride. Consider the classic case almost every investor eventually faces. A stock is bought with confidence. It falls. Instead of reassessing, the investor holds on, then buys more, to average down, pouring fresh resources into a battle that terrain has already decided. Years later, they're still holding, not because the strategy makes sense, but because admitting the war was lost feels more painful than the war itself. The wealthy are not strangers to loss. What separates them is speed of exit. They treat a bad decision as data, not identity. Cut early, reposition, move on, while the average person treats retreat as failure, and so keeps fighting a war the terrain quietly won years ago. Ask yourself honestly, is there a job, a debt, an investment, or even a relationship with money itself that you're still fighting for, not because it serves you, but because you've already given it too much to quit? This is the discipline almost no one teaches, knowing when a battle, however painful to abandon, has already been lost. But cutting losses is only half the equation. The other half requires something far rarer than exit strategy, the ability to fight without depleting yourself at all. Sun Tzu taught that a skilled commander seeks victory through the strength of his position, not the exhaustion of his own men. He uses terrain, timing, and allies to make the battle easier, never treating raw personal effort as the only path to conquest. This single idea separates two completely different financial lives. The average person believes wealth is built by working harder, more hours, more overtime, more personal grinding. And for a while, this works. But personal effort has a ceiling. There are only so many hours in a body, so many years before exhaustion collects its debt. The wealthy learn a different lesson early: stop relying solely on your own strength, and start borrowing strength the terrain already offers. This is what leverage actually means, not a reckless gamble, but a strategic multiplication. Other people's time, organized through a business or a team. Other people's capital, borrowed responsibly to acquire an asset that pays for itself. Even other people's attention, through content or reputation, working quietly while its creator sleeps. Jeff Bezos didn't personally deliver every package that built Amazon's fortune. He built a system where thousands of hands and millions of dollars of borrowed capital moved in a direction he designed once, and benefited from repeatedly. Compound interest itself is a form of borrowed strength, time doing the labor that effort alone never could. A modest sum invested consistently in your 20s can quietly outgrow a much larger sum invested in someone's 40s, not because the older investor worked less, but because they borrowed less time from the terrain of compounding. Ask yourself, in your current financial life, is everything still running on your personal effort alone? Or have you begun building systems, assets, and relationships that fight part of the battle without you? This is how small, ordinary decisions compound into extraordinary outcomes. But even borrowed strength collapses instantly under one force. Sun Tzu feared more than any enemy army, the commander's own uncontrolled temperament. Sun Tzu issued a warning sharper than any battlefield tactic: a general ruled by anger can be provoked into destruction, and a general ruled by desire can be lured into ruin. The most brilliant strategy in the world collapses instantly the moment its commander loses control of his own emotions. This is the final battlefield, and it's the one that quietly destroys more fortunes than bad luck ever will. Watch what happens during a market crash. Prices fall, panic spreads, and the investor who spent years building a disciplined position sells everything in a single afternoon, not because the strategy failed, but because fear seized command of the army. Sun Tzu would recognize this instantly. The general abandoned the high ground not because the enemy took it, but because he panicked and gave it away himself. The same pattern appears in reverse. A stock soars, headlines scream opportunity, and the same investor who was calm for years suddenly buys recklessly at the peak, not from strategy, but from desire. Greed, like anger, is simply another emotion capable of hijacking the general's judgment at the worst possible moment. This extends far beyond investing. The impulsive purchase made after a hard day, meant to soothe a feeling rather than serve a plan. The business decision made in a flash of ego, to prove a point rather than build an advantage. Each one is a small surrender of command to an emotion that was never fit to lead. The wealthy are not emotionless. They've simply learned what Sun Tzu knew 25 centuries ago, that discipline isn't the absence of feeling, it's the refusal to let feeling make decisions built for strategy. The pause before the purchase. The stillness before the panic sell. The patience before the impulsive leap. That pause is the entire war, compressed into a single moment of self-command. Ask yourself honestly, how many of your financial decisions were made by the strategist in you, and how many were made by the general who'd already lost his temper? 6 battles have now been fought: the self, the timing, the concealment, the terrain, the exit, and the leverage. But none of them hold unless this final one, the quietest and most personal, is won first. 7 battles. Not fought with weapons, but with attention, patience, and self-command. And notice what none of them required: luck, a wealthy family, a rare opportunity, or permission from anyone else. Sun Tzu never promised an easy war. He promised something better, a way to make the war unnecessary. Know yourself before the enemy ever finds your weakness. Prepare in silence, long before the world is watching. Reveal your position only when it strengthens you. Walk toward empty ground while others bleed over crowded battlefields. Cut a losing war before it quietly drains a decade. Borrow strength instead of exhausting your own. And above all, command your own temperament before it commands you. This was never really about money. Money was only ever the terrain. The real war, the one Sun Tzu understood better than any economist ever will, is fought entirely in how a person thinks, positions, and waits. Most people will spend their whole lives as soldiers, reacting to a battlefield they never chose, exhausted by a war they didn't design. But you now carry something they don't have, not a shortcut, not a guarantee, but a map. The map of a strategist who wins quietly, long before the visible battle even begins. The choice in front of you is simple, and Sun Tzu would recognize it instantly: keep fighting the war everyone else is losing, or start positioning for the one almost no one else is fighting. You are no longer a soldier. You are a strategist. And the first move, the quiet one, the one nobody claps for, starts the moment this video ends. If this shifted how you see wealth, subscribe. The next battlefield is waiting.